The village of Ioru was quiet, with only the moon and stars lighting the night. Yinka, a lonely fisherman, sat by the river, fixing his fishing nets. The water sparkled like tiny diamonds, and a cool breeze brushed his face. Yinka has been having strange dreams. Every night, he saw a beautiful woman with glowing skin and a sweet voice. She called to him, but he could never see her clearly. He always woke up feeling confused, but her voice stayed in his mind. Tonight, something felt strange. The usual sounds of frogs and crickets were gone. The air was still, and Ease felt as if someone was watching him. Then he heard it. Yinka. A soft voice floated across the water. It was her, the woman from his dreams. His heart beat faster as he turned to look. Out of the mist rising from the river, she appeared. Her face was as beautiful as the moon, and her long dress seemed to flow like water. Her eyes glowed softly, and when she smiled, Yinka felt warm and calm. "You came for me," he said, his voice trembling. "I've always been here," she replied, her voice like music. Yinka couldn't look away. He stepped closer as if her presence pulled him. She reached out her hand, and when she touched his chest, it felt like a wave of joy ran through him. But then, it turned cold, so cold it hurt. Her smile began to change. Her glowing eyes darkened, and her face twisted into something terrifying. Her teeth grew sharp, her skin pale and stretched, and her voice turned into a growl. Yinka tried to pull away, but it was too late. The air around them felt heavy, like it was crushing him. He couldn't scream. All he saw was her monstrous face before everything went black. The river grew quiet again, as if nothing had happened. The only sound was the wind, carrying a faint, chilling laugh that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The children of Ioru laughed and ran across the open field as the sun shined below the horizon. Dami, a boy of 10 years old, was in the middle of the fun, his bare feet kicking up dust as he chased his friends. The field was alive with their joy, their voices blending with the chirping of crickets and the gentle rustle of the evening breeze. Then, everything changed. A low hum filled the air. It wasn't loud, but it was strange, soft, steady, and almost like a song. The children stopped playing and looked around, their laughter fading. The hum seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. "Do you hear that?" one of the boys asked, his voice shaky. "It's coming from over there," Dami said, pointing toward the edge of the field where the tall grass grew thick and wild. The others hesitated, their eyes wide with fear. "Don't go." "Dami," a girl whispered. "It's not safe." But Dami couldn't stop himself. Something about the hum called to him, pulling him like a magnet. Ignoring his friend's warnings, he walked toward the sound, his heart beating fast. The hum grew louder as Dami pushed through the tall grass. The air around him felt different, heavy and cool, even though the evening was warm. Soon, he reached a clearing. There, under the pale light of the moon, stood a girl. She was young, about his age, but something about her wasn't normal. Her skin shimmered like water under sunlight, and her eyes glowed faintly. She wore a dress that looked like it was made of flowing river water, and her hair floated gently as if caught in an invisible breeze. Who are you?" Dami asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. The girl smiled, her expression calm but mysterious. "I am Isoko," she said, her voice soft and melodic. "You heard my call, didn't you?" Dami nodded, unable to look away. "I've been waiting for you," she continued. "You are special, Dami. You can see and hear what others cannot." He didn't know what to say. His legs felt rooted to the ground, but he wasn't scared, not entirely. There was something comforting about her, even though she was unlike anything he had ever seen. "What do you want from me?" he finally asked. Isoko stepped closer, holding out her hand. In her palm was a smooth, glowing stone. It pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. "This is Idanu," she said. "It's a gift. Keep it close, and I will always be with you. Together, we will do great things." Dami hesitated, but something deep inside told him to take it. Slowly, he reached out and picked up the stone. The moment his fingers touched it, a warmth spread through him, and the hum stopped. Isoko's smile widened. "Now we are connected," she said. "Do not forget me, Dami. Promise me." "I promise," he said, clutching the stone tightly. With that, Isoko began to fade, her shimmering form dissolving into the night. The clearing grew quiet, and Dami was left standing alone, the glowing stone in his hand. When Dami returned to his friends, they crowded around him, asking questions like, "What happened? Did you see anything? Where did you go?" But Dami couldn't explain. He just shook his head and slipped the stone into his pocket. "It was nothing," he said, forcing a smile. Yet, deep down, he knew his life would never be the same. The city of Oshore was alive with noise and light. Cars honked, people rushed down busy streets, and the hum of life echoed everywhere. In a small apartment high above the chaos, Dami stared out at the glowing skyline. He had left his village, Ioru, years ago, but part of him was still there. Every night, his dreams took him back to the riverside. There, waiting for him, was Isoko. When Dami first came to the city, life was hard. He worked at Vantage Corporation, a big company, but he was just another worker in a sea of faces. His ideas were ignored, and his hard work went unnoticed. One night, after a long and frustrating day, Dami fell into a deep sleep. In his dream, he stood by the familiar river. Isoko was there, her white dress glowing softly. She smiled as though she knew what he was going through. "You're strong, Dami," she said, her voice calm. "But strength without direction is wasted. Show them what you're made of." She bent down, cupping the river water in her hands. The water shimmered, showing Dami himself, standing confidently in a boardroom, speaking with purpose. When he woke up, her words stayed with him. The next day at work, Dami took a chance. His team was struggling with a project, so he stayed late to come up with a new plan. The following morning, he presented his ideas to his manager. At first, the room was quiet. Then, people started nodding, and by the end, his manager was impressed. "Good work, Dami," his boss said, tapping him on the shoulder. That moment changed everything. People began noticing him. His ideas were sharp, and his instincts seemed almost magical. Dami started rising through the ranks. As Dami's career grew, his connection with Isoko stayed strong. In his dreams, she continued to guide him. When he was offered a big promotion to lead a high-risk project, he wasn't sure he was ready. That night, Isoko appeared in his dream again, standing in the river. "The waters ahead are rough," she said, "but you were made for this." She touched the stone around his neck, Idanu, which still hung close to his heart. The next day, Dami accepted the role. Under his leadership, the project became a huge success, earning the company millions. People called him a genius, but Dami knew it was Isoko's wisdom that made the difference. By his early 30s, Dami was one of the youngest executives at Vantage Corporation. He had a nice apartment, a sharp wardrobe, and the respect of his peers. But even with all his success, he never forgot Isoko. Despite his success, Dami didn't talk about Isoko with anyone. She was his secret, the quiet force behind his achievements. He often wondered why she chose him, but he trusted her guidance. One evening, standing on his balcony and looking out at the city lights, he felt Idanu glow faintly against his chest. A soft breeze brushed his face, and he knew Isoko was there. "Thank you," he whispered, his words carried into the night. Dami's life was a picture of success. He had climbed to the top of the corporate ladder, lived in a sleek apartment overlooking the bustling city of Oshore, and was admired by everyone around him. But his life took an unexpected turn when he met Tenny, a charming and kind-hearted woman with a warm smile that seemed to light up every room. Their meeting was casual, a chance encounter at a gallery opening organized by one of Dami's business partners. Tenny was an artist, her work vibrant and full of life. She had a way of seeing the world that fascinated Dami. It started with brunch dates and long walks in the park, then blossomed into a romance filled with laughter and shared dreams. For the first time in years, Dami felt truly grounded, his heart opening up to love in ways he didn't think possible. One evening, Dami fell asleep after a late-night call with Tenny. He was exhausted but happy, thinking about their plans to travel together the following weekend. But as soon as his eyes closed, he was back at the river. The air was thick with tension. Isoko stood in the dark side of the river, her expression colder than he had ever seen. "You've broken your promise, Dami," she said, her voice sharp. Dami frowned, confused. "What promise?" "Isoko, I don't understand." She stepped closer, the river swirling around her. "You vowed that no one else would take my place. That we would walk this path together. And now, you let her in." Dami's heart pounded. "Tenny means no harm, Isoko. She has nothing to do with us." Isoko's eyes glowed fiercely. "You think I don't see? Every moment you give to her, you take from me. Be careful, Dami. You've tied yourself to me, and I do not share." Dami woke up drenched in sweat, Idanu glowing faintly on his nightstand. Over the next few weeks, Dami tried to push the dream out of his mind, but Isoko's presence grew stronger. At first, it was just nightmares, dreams of the river swallowing him whole, Isoko's voice echoing with anger. Then, strange things began happening in real life. One night, as Dami prepared dinner for Tenny in his apartment, the lights began to flicker strongly. The air turned icy cold, and a vase shattered on its own, sending shards flying across the room. "Dami!" Tenny gasped, clutching his arm. "What's happening?" I don't know," Dami stammered, though deep down, he had an idea. When Tenny left that night, he sat alone in the dark, clutching Idanu. "Isoko, stop this," he whispered. "Please." But the only response was a faint hum in the air. Dami decided to confide in Tenny. Over dinner one evening, he took her hand and told her everything, about Isoko, the bond they shared, and the strange occurrences since they started dating. Tenny listened quietly, her brow furrowed. "So you're saying this, spirit woman is jealous of me?" "I don't know if it's jealousy," Dami said. "But she doesn't want me to be with you. She thinks I'm breaking some promise." Tenny's eyes softened. "Dami, you can't let this control your life. Whatever this is, we'll face it together. I'm not going anywhere." Her words gave him comfort, but in the back of his mind, he knew Isoko would not let this go easily. Despite the warnings and the strange events, Dami was deeply in love with Tenny. He decided to propose, believing that their love could overcome anything, even the wrath of a spirit. On a clear evening, he took Tenny to a rooftop overlooking the city. As the sun set, painting the sky in warm colors, he knelt down and opened a small velvet box. "Tenny, you've brought light into my life in ways I never imagined. Will you marry me?" Tenny's eyes filled with tears as she nodded. "Yes, Dami. 1,000 times yes." But as they embraced, the air around them grew cold. The hum Dami knew all too well filled his ears, and a shadow flickered at the edge of his vision. That night, Dami dreamed of Isoko again, but this time, the river was a raging storm. She stood at its center, her figure larger than life, her voice like thunder. "You dare choose her over me," she roared. "After everything I've given you?" "Isoko, please," Dami begged. "I never meant to hurt you. But I have a life to live. Tenny is part of that life now." Isoko's face twisted with anger. "You think you can escape me? You are mine, Dami. You always will be." When he woke, his apartment was in shambles, mirrors shattered, books scattered, and Idanu glowing fiercely. As the wedding approached, the supernatural encounters grew worse. Dami's business deals began falling apart, unexplained accidents happened at work, and Tenny started seeing strange figures in her dreams. "Dami," she said one night, her voice trembling. "I don't know how much more of this I can take. I love you, but this isn't normal." Dami held her close, guilt eating away at him. He knew he had to make a choice, fight for the life he wanted with Tenny or surrender to the bond he had with Isoko. One night, as Tenny slept peacefully beside him, Dami made a desperate decision. he slipped out of bed, clutching Idanu. Stepping onto the cold balcony, he stared down at the bustling streets below. "I won't let you control me anymore," he whispered, his voice trembling. "This ends now." With all his strength, he hurled the stone into the night, watching it disappear into the darkness. Relief washed over him as he returned to bed, but when he awoke the next morning, Idanu was back on his nightstand, glowing faintly. Tenny noticed his pale face as he stared at the stone. "What's wrong, Dami?" "It's back," he muttered, his voice shaking. "I threw it away last night, but it's back." Tenny's expression hardened. "We can't handle this alone. We need help." The decision to seek Pastor Joel's help seemed like the last ray of hope for Dami and Tenny. His nightmares were worsening, Isoko's presence had grown more strong, and the strange occurrences around them were no longer just frightening, they were now dangerous. Pastor Joel, a charismatic figure with a booming voice and an air of authority, assured them that he could solve their problem. His church was well known, but whispers of dubious and unholy practices followed him like a shadow. Desperation already clouded Dami's judgment, and he chose to believe Pastor Joel's promises. "The bond is spiritual, you both are married and even have children in the spirit realm, she is your spiritual wife and that is why she won't let you go so easily without a fight, but the bond is not unbreakable," Joel declared during their meeting. "She feeds on your fear and your guilt, but with my help and guidance, we will cut off her hold on you completely." He then went on to demand a substantial, sacrificial seed, a hefty sum of money, to perform the deliverance. Tenny hesitated, her instinct screaming that something was off, but Dami was desperate. He paid without question, convinced this was the only way to free himself from Isoko. In a dramatic deliverance ceremony, Joel and his followers gathered around Dami. The stone, Idanu, was placed on the altar. Joel chanted loudly, speaking in tongues, his voice rising and falling in as he prayed. "Spirit of darkness, leave this man alone, flee from him, go back into the darkness from whence you came." Joel shouted, slamming his hand together. The air immediately grew cold, and an angry sound began to fill the room. Dami felt Isoko's presence surrounding him, her voice whispering, "You're mine, Dami. They cannot save you." Joel continued his performance, sprinkling oil and shouting commands. Suddenly, Idanu shattered on the altar, sending shards of smaller stones across the room. Joel smiled triumphantly. "It is done. You are free," he said. For the first time in months, Dami felt a sense of peace. The nightmares stopped, and the spiritual presence that had followed him disappeared. He and Tenny resumed planning their wedding, believing the worst was behind them. But Isoko hadn't left. She had merely stepped into the shadows, waiting for her moment. The day of Dami and Tenny's wedding finally arrived. It was a beautiful ceremony in a grand church filled with friends and family. Tenny walked down the aisle in a flowing white dress, her smile beautiful and ever radiant as she locked eyes with Dami. As they stood at the altar, exchanging vows, a strange sensation began to flow over Dami. It started as a faint sound in his ears, growing louder until it drowned and muted the priest's words. His vision blurred, and the room seemed to darken. Isoko's voice echoed in his mind, sharper than ever. "You thought you could be free of me? You thought I would leave you be? You are really a foolish boy," she screamed, "you belong to me. From the first day you touched Idanu you became mine forever." Suddenly Dami's grip on Tenny's hands tightened, and she drew her hand back with fear. "Dami, are you okay?" she whispered, concern flashing in her eyes. He opened his mouth to respond, but his voice sounded loud and demonic. "I warned you," he screamed. Before anyone could react, Dami's body jerked as if pulled by invisible strings. His hand moved to the ceremonial knife meant for cutting the wedding cake, and with a fast, horrifying motion, he plunged it into Tenny's chest. People shouted and screams filled the church as Tenny collapsed, blood staining her white dress. Dami stood frozen, his eyes wide with terror as he regained control of his body. What have I done?" he stammered, dropping the knife. The congregation erupted into chaos. Some rushed to Tenny's aid, while others restrained Dami. he sobbed uncontrollably, shaking his head. It wasn't me. I didn't do it. As the police arrived and placed him in handcuffs, Dami looked up to see a familiar figure standing in the shadows of the church, a woman in a flowing white dress, her look glowing and eyes fixed on him as she laughs mockingly. You thought you could leave me, Dami. But no one escapes Isoko. Tenny was rushed to the hospital, but the wounds to her chest was fatal. She died before she could undergo surgery, her dreams of a life with Dami shattered. Dami was taken to prison, charged with her murder. He spent his days tormented by guilt, replaying the events over and over. At night, Isoko returned to his dreams, her voice both mocking and possessive. You were mine from the moment you saw me at the river, she whispered. You chose me, Dami. And you will never be free.
Subscribe to stay updated for part 2.